Thank you. So this long title is mainly about Active Directory persistence and kind of like where you can hide and where you should look for potential compromised security things in Active Directory. So where can attackers hide? I'm Jakob Heidelberg. I work with Fort Consult. We are part of NCC Group that many of you probably know. This is a post-exploitation talk, so I'm not going to drop any shells, unfortunately. This is about when the attackers already have gone in. If you want to hit me on Twitter, if you have some interesting ideas after this talk, I'll be very much interested in optimizing the material with other ideas. The usual disclaimer, this is my own opinions and views. This talk is built on other people's work, stuff that I've researched on for some time now. I've previously worked for Microsoft and also got some ideas about how this stuff is put together, and seen some stuff out there in real life incident response cases too. And sometimes I get a crazy idea too. The process here is like thinking we should split our minds as we do as hackers. Split your mind and look at it from an evil perspective, an office perspective, and then look at it from a defense perspective. So kind of what I think about this talk here is a lot of people should probably start thinking about could I prevent this? Could I detect this? And what if that actually happened? Or what if it has already happened in my environment? What could I do about it? I like the approach of living off the land. So this is not about malware. This is not about like backdoors or rats you can download somewhere. You can use frameworks to like Veil framework or others to generate some malware. This is about built-in functionality that is inside the operating system, built into Active Directory itself. So the scenario is that something bad, really bad happened. Somebody gained domain admin permissions in the environment. We don't actually know how. That's actually, it doesn't matter for this talk. It could be a phishing mail. It could be some kind of 0-day. It could be whatever. Lateral movement past the hash, whatever. So this guy, he owned your environment, and maybe he's actually an insider or an ex-employee or something. He doesn't have to be like that evil guy. It could be some administrator who brought home a backup of Active Directory at some point. Just to be sure. Yeah. How many in here actually administer Active Directory on a daily basis? Only a few. How many of you administer somebody else's Active Directory because you owned them at some point? Okay, no hands. Oh, that's good. Okay, so this is about the backdoors. They are out there somewhere. We don't know where. Let's talk about this. So the assumption is that the crown jewels are stolen. In Active Directory sense, this is the ntds.dit file and the system file, which is part of the registry. Those two files combined together will give you hashes of all passwords for users and computers in Active Directory. If an attacker attacks you, if he wants something bad to happen, or he wants to make sure that he owns you real hard, he will make a backup of these files. The most common attack after this is the golden tickets attack, where you can use a particular account called KRB-TTT. How many people in here know about the KRB-TTT? Okay, great, like half or so. That's cool. So with a hash of that one, we can generate tickets for kind of everything. So this is the method I would use these days to take a quick backup of the environment and get out of there, maybe stay low for a while. It's very easy. The command is at the top. If you just issue that in a single line and not like I did it in the actual screenshot, you will make an install from media backup of Active Directory. it will include the system and the security keys from registry, and also this ntds.dit file. But in real life, there's no such thing as game over. We cannot come out in an incident response and say to customers, okay, they got you, they owned you, it's done. We have to figure out a way to either, should we rebuild the entire environment, or can we actually look somewhere and see, this typical TGP thingy, techniques, tactics, and procedures. I don't know if it's really a thing. It's like looking for known things. You look for things you know could happen. It's kind of like antivirus, and who in here respects antivirus? I don't know. I don't. Active Directory is that guy everybody trusts. The file servers, the print servers, the intranet servers, everybody look to Active Directory for authorization or for authentication. And that's why it's so interesting with Active Directory. But what's even more interesting is what Active Directory itself trusts. What does Active Directory actually believe in or depend on? And there's actually a lot of things. It's not just about domain controllers, this thing. So, and when you look at this, it's, the chain isn't stronger than the weakest link. So once you can pinpoint some of the dependencies of Active Directory and say, I own this part, or this part is compromised, actually, the entire Active Directory is compromised. So I've tried to categorize some of these findings, some of the research here, some of the security dependencies and the interdependencies of Active Directory. This is my categorization. It might be wrong. You can do it in other ways. But in overall, I'm looking at access control and permissions, domain controllers as a separate thing, administrative practices, management servers, and operating system integrity. That is what we have domain controllers and management servers have in common. And then group policy objects. And the last thing is one of the things I love the most. So let's start with this one. I explained to you a bit about this ntds.dit file. Many people actually don't know where their copies of these things are lying around. It could be backups, it could be old disks, it could be, it could be lying around everywhere, VMware snapshots. Also what you need to look at is who actually has access to these files, because implicitly they are actually domain admins too, if they have access to these files. I mentioned the KRB TGT account before. It's a disabled account, but it's the most important. It's the master key for the entire Active Directory, this one. And it's never changed by default. I'll get back to that. So we have these privileged accounts in Active Directory. We have often service accounts that are also privileged accounts. We have sometimes still shared accounts, even shared privileged accounts, which is a really, really bad idea. Simple things as group membership is even a problem out there these days, where we get around and see customers that have a pretty complex group structure, and they haven't been able to actually figure out that at some point the IT group became a member of the domain admins group, making everybody that is dropped into the IT group a domain admins. And this is very, very, very simple, right? And also under access controls and permissions, I have to put in password policies and password strength, because if you don't have that, you don't have a secure Active Directory. If you can attack the passwords, if it's 3 characters, whatever, of course you won't have a strong a strong Active Directory security posture. So I've seen IT audits, and a lot of IT audits actually, they only look at these main groups in Active Directory: domain admins, enterprise admins, schema admins. They look to find members of those groups, and they actually miss some of the very important ones, like the built-in administrators, or sometimes even the backup operators. This is very simple. Even when scripting and trying to figure out who are members of domain admins, they will query the wrong field, like the member of field on a particular user. That will not include the primary group. which could be set to domain admins, and they wouldn't figure out this. They wouldn't figure out what the nested groups look like either. Also, attackers, they know they shouldn't drop an account into the domain admins, but that's another thing. And often I also find that people have a schedule where they look for the group's membership. Has it changed since last time that we sent an alert something? That's not the way to do security. You should have an alert on an event base. You cannot just look once in a while, because else the attacker is just going to go in and out. Just make an account, domain admin, do the bad stuff, get out again, and just sit and wait around. And what's getting a bit more complicated is computer accounts being dropped into these highly privileged groups. Even Microsoft SCCM servers, you will find articles that state that you should just drop them into like domain admins, and things are going to go good for you, because they won't have any problems accessing stuff. That might not be the best way to do it. If you own the SSM server, it could be like you just get the opportunity to drop a local admin user on that box. Then you actually own Active Directory, because the SCCM server is running a system on a domain controller, as I'll explain later. That actually means he's a domain admin. So I mentioned the backup operators. This is the backup operator who is locked onto a domain controller and did a system state backup. That will include the most interesting files in Active Directory. Logging on a console on a domain controller these days is not as hard as it was like 5 years, 10 years ago, because at that point you had to go down into the server room somewhere in the basement maybe, or in the data center. These days you have virtual console access. So if you get access to the virtual environment, for instance, you will have access, if you get access to the ILO or some other kind of network attached KVM, then you will have access to this too. So there you could combine and do some very bad things just being a backup operator. And it's not just about default groups. And this is one of the things I normally talk to IT auditors about. They tend to look a lot at the group stuff. But you have something called delegation in Active Directory. You can right-click the domain and delegate kind of like anything, any permission, any right to some user account. It could be a user, it could be a group, it could be a computer even. And that's actually a very efficient way these days to hide out as an attacker, because really nobody looks there, nobody knows what it should look like, and nobody actually dares to mess around with it because it looks really, really, really dangerous. So the IT admin, he prefers to leave it just as it is. Yeah. Active Directory relies on some authentication authorization mechanisms. We talked about Kerberos and the ticket forging with the golden ticket. There are also silver tickets. I'm not going to go into this. There are overpass the hash tickets. You can have something that is overlooked a lot these days is Kerberos delegation. So on a user account, you can have the account being delegated like unconstrained delegation, where it's actually able to impersonate a user that authenticates to it. So if you get a domain admin to authenticate to your computer, you could do this by DNS poisoning, off-spoofing, whatever. He will connect to a share on your machine. You will get the ticket, and you can then, from that point, impersonate the user, because you have an evil laptop that is delegated control like this. And in my experience, nobody really looks for this. Do you know the SID history trick? How many in here know the SID history trick? Okay, okay, not that many. When you get a Kerberos ticket, you can also have a SID history, which is actually made for migration scenarios. You get from one domain or one forest to another. You will have to take something with you, the SID from the old forest, so you can still authenticate to resource in the old forest while the migration is going on, basically. The thing is, if you can put in a SID, like using a tool like Mimikatz, lovely tool, shout out to Mr. Benjamin out there. Anyway, you can put in a SID of, for instance, the domain admins or the administrator account himself, the -500 account in Active Directory. If you just log on as a normal user, Sneaky Sydney, somebody, whatever his name is, he looks like a normal user if you look in the member of tags of this guy, but you have to look really careful for the SID history, because he actually could be a domain member anyway. He can hide out with this trick, and it's an old trick. It's like 10, 15, I don't know, 20 years old, and it's still out there, and Mimikatz have a great implementation of this. And one thing I'm coming with here today is, I think a new thing is using smart card logon. Because what we're going to look at is, what are people actually doing when they're attacked, and they realize it, they start doing stuff, maybe resetting all passwords in the domain. I'm going to get back to this. But if the attacker issued a smart card to himself, for smart card logon, the only thing that he needs is to have the user principal name on that smart card. And no matter what the password has been changed to, he's still going to be able to log on as that account. And that's the demo, one of the demos I have today. We'll get there. I even see guest accounts being enabled. That means anonymous access, almost. So you don't have to give in a password to... look out for this. It's strange. It shouldn't be there. There should be no guest accounts. It's just not the way to do it. This is the Mimikatz. If you haven't played around with this tool, it's one of the best tools out there, and it's not just to see the secure LSA and the privileges you have already. It's so many other things you can use this tool to do. And this is the SID history, where I'm adding the SID of the domain admins to a sect user. From that point, even though he looks like a normal domain user, he's actually also a domain admin. This is the way to detect it, or one way to detect it. I made a small PowerShell one-liner. It's a one-liner. You can't see that, but it is. And if you execute that, you will see that there's something strange going on, because this user actually has a SID history value within that, where the value of the domain is actually within the domain itself, and that shouldn't happen. As I said, it's a migration scenario. It should be from another domain. But this is one way to detect it. And a very interesting guy, admin SD holder. This guy, he's holding on to some protected groups and protected group users accounts. So I've listed them up here on the slide, but he will constantly set permissions of on these objects that are member of these groups, or and the thing is, sometimes admins will try to change it back. But if you actually, as an attacker, manipulated the admin SD holder object, there will be like 60 minutes as a max, and it will reapply. You could set that interval if you want to something else. I'm not encouraging you to do that. I'm encouraging admins to look out for the admin SD holder object, because it's important. You can control what groups should be controlled by this. You can set a value to exclude some groups. What will actually happen is that objects that are member of these groups will get the admin count equals to 1. And from there, the permissions will be set on those accounts to whatever you have configured. And one interesting thing, I think, is that group policy creator owners, they are not included here. So if you can create GPOs in the domain, but you can't link them, but you could create a GPO, just make another account, link it, and then go back into the group policy creators group and modify that GPO, and you have like full control. I'll get back to that. Trusts is an issue for itself. People set up trusts out there like it's a fusion between two companies maybe. It just has to go fast. So there's a full trust back and forth, and no SID filtering perhaps. So, I mean, that means it's possible to also do this SID history trick in that way. Lots of ways to abuse trust. One of the newer things is that you can, with Mimikatz, for instance, you can actually extract the trust key, the inter-realm key, from a trust set up between two more domains, actually 2 domains. They're individual. And you can steal that. It will normally last for 30 days, but you can also configure this, how long time it's going to last. and then you can create new tickets with the trust key itself. So that's interesting. And another thing, Microsoft has a great new thing called Microsoft Local Administrator Password Solution. I just look at this with the evil bit switched on. What you could do as an attacker would be to configure the permission. This is a schema extension, and the permissions are set like Microsoft recommends how you should set it. Maybe most people do it that way. If you just change that a bit as an attacker, so maybe the guest account could read this particular attribute, then you would have actually access to all the local administrator passwords for all machines in the environment, except domain controllers themselves. But I'll guarantee you there's going to be a system that the domain controller is dependent on that you will own, like management servers, which we'll get back to. So domain controllers. I'll get back to general operating system integrity in another section of this. Anything that runs as a system on the domain controller is basically a domain admin. So if you have systems out there that are running with like SCCM, I mentioned antivirus, anything, scheduled tasks, startup scripts, they will run with domain admin permissions. So an attacker could set up something running a system and just get out of there. He can do anything with the domain, really. Also, domain controllers rely on others. If one gets owned, everybody is owned. So what if an attacker actually introduced a new domain controller? During the attack, I'll spawn up a virtual machine from my attack laptop, whatever. I'll negotiate with the domain to become a domain controller myself. I'll start synchronizing the entire Active Directory. I'll do whatever harm I want to do, and I'll just shut it down. What happened in that period is not going to be very easy to detect because the event logging is happening on the domain controller itself. So that's a kind of interesting scenario. So we should maybe try to detect if somebody adds a domain controller to the environment. And I really don't think people would spot such a thing. Like it's not something that's common to look for because people are not thinking with the evil bit switch on. Even Active Directory sync with Azure could be a potential attack vector if somebody has access to the Azure account. It's just to say there's a dependency there too. Yeah. So also the hashes I mentioned, it uses hashes and computer hashes. We get, with the computer hashes, we also get domain controller hashes. And with those, we can actually impersonate domain controllers. There's an interesting tool out there now, DC Sync, from also the same guy who wrote Mimikatz. And there's actually also a PowerShell implementation of this, where you can boot up a script that, or an application that will start synchronizing only passwords with the domain controller, so we'll get all the hashes down of domain controller, kind of like acting like another domain controller. And if an attacker has all of these hashes, normally they would be reset after 30 days for computer accounts. They will last up to 30 days, but an attacker could also set a small change on the domain controller on the clients themselves to make sure that they will not change the password. So he will have a longer time with a nice foothold in the environment, potentially. So we could also introduce evil security support provider interfaces like Mimikatz. They has 2 implementations. I know I said I wouldn't talk about malware, but I really don't consider Mimikatz malware. Maybe I should, I don't know. But it's a nice tool. It can patch in memory, and it can also load a DLL on the box themselves and place passwords wherever you want them to be in clear text, for instance. There was the skeleton key. That was a zero-day attack. That was, I think it hit Kaspersky. This is like a doomsday attack on a Windows Active Directory environment because there was no validation of a part of the ticket. So anybody who had a user account in Active Directory could change like whatever groups they're a member of. There's a famous picture of somebody having like out on Twitter, a boarding pass, and then he wrote pilot himself and handed to the cabin crew, and they will just say, okay, welcome captain, go into the cockpit and let's get on. So that's actually the same attack, just in Active Directory. Oh, and another thing I will demo today, I hope, is the directory service restore mode, which blew my mind like 4, 5, 6 days ago or so. We have always been taught that a domain controller does not have local accounts. It turns out that is a truth with modifications. It turns out that it actually has a local account, the 500 administrator, that can actually also be used while the domain controller is live, just by setting one single registry parameter on the domain controller itself. So we don't have to reboot the domain controller into directory services restore mode to log on as this local account. We can actually do it online while the machine is loaded. So this gives us another attack vector. As an attacker, you can have a backdoor directly on the domain controller with a local administrator account. I think that's beautiful. I don't know, it's just me. It even works with remote desktop if you are on Windows Server 2008 R2 or below. In 2012 R2, I'm getting an error at this point. The local session manager service failed to sign in, blah, blah, blah. And to me, this looks like it's terminal server licensing issues. I'm actually kind of allowed to log on, but then there's the terminal server say, hey, you don't have a license. So I think I can fix that, maybe. So need some more research. This is an example of how it's done. The picture up at the right says that I'm logged on here, and I'm trying to launch Active Directory users and computers, dsa.msc. And it says you can only manage local users. Okay, then I'll use psexec to just launch as the system account in system context, and I do the same command, and then I'm getting in there. This is how one could see a sneaky backdoor method on a domain controller. You could have some kind of execution mechanism running there, using built-in functionality, of course. PowerShell shared profile I'm going to show in a bit. And you could have like the local startup script running in the local machine context, software installation, whatever. And that could point to somewhere else in the environment, somewhere the attacker can control. So let's say I'm not in any group, I'm not at the domain controller itself, I only configure this functionality and the pointer out to some files here where I will make sure I have share and write permissions to the NTFS permissions, whatever. So at some later point, I can manipulate that part of the environment and maybe put in another executable, another MSI file, modify the script that is included in the login scripts on all the environments, all the computers in the environments, including domain controllers, perhaps. I think this is a neat trick. So these are some of the things you could do if you are running a system on a domain controller. I particularly like the one where you're looking for new DCs constantly, because in a restore environment, many people tend to boot up new domain controllers because then they trust those domain controllers and then will shut down the old ones. They know they have been compromised. But if the old ones were just looking for new domain controllers and then authenticating to the new ones, installing themselves, you really don't gain anything from adding new domain controllers to the environment. I don't know, maybe it's just me. I have bad thoughts sometimes. Group policy objects. Yeah, I was surprised myself that a domain controller actually had local group policy objects, but they do. So that's a great persistent mechanisms. Inside the policy settings, there are obvious things to use. I tend to like the startup script and the shutdown script because it's run in system context. But even on a domain controller, if you use log on and log off, it's also run in domain admin mode, most likely, unless it's one of these backup operators who's trying to steal the NTDS file, I don't know. But then it's not going to be domain admin privileges. A lot of things to do. I don't know if you saw this WSUS, Windows Service Update Server, well, whatever it's called. There was an attack, WSuspect, that was released at Black Hat, I think, where you can actually manipulate the XML file while they're negotiating system that is trying to be updated and the update server itself. So you can make it run other things. I mean, you could point the WSUS to your proxy server if you wanted, if you have this kind of access. So the interesting thing is here for defenders to ask themselves, would I spot this? Would I detect this? Would I detect this for domain group policy objects? Would I detect this for local policy objects? It could be just a small change. And the most significant one, I think, is where you change the permission on the actual, if you have a startup script or a logon script. That could be one way to do it, really hard to detect. You can even reintroduce the weak implementation of local administrator passwords that we have with the MS14-025. It turns out that the key used by group policy preferences was shared. It was a shared key. It was a static key. It was a symmetric cryptography, right? So once this was public, Microsoft released something that blocks the UI, the group policy management console, so you cannot introduce new passwords for local administrators like this. But we could introduce it anyway by just dropping some XML files out there in the sysvol, for instance. So we should look for that, right? This is if I try to manipulate the sysvol directly. If I try to change the NCFS settings, the gpmc is going to pop up and say, hey, something looks weird. So this could be an indicator of compromise, actually, if a MNC pops up like this. But what's going to happen is most likely the admin is just going to say okay, and it's going to fix itself then. If it says cancel, we still have NCFS permissions out there. It might not be every day or every week or every month they launch this tool. So it might take some time before they actually realize that we have modified or are able to modify group policy objects by manipulating the actual files in sysvol. Management systems, often have system context. We have SCOM, we have Tivoli, we have backup servers, we have all kinds of things that are allowed to do stuff on the domain controllers. So if you compromise those, even a vulnerability scanner set up for authenticated scans could be potentially a local administrator on a domain controller. So, or domain admin actually then. We also have deployment services. If I'm in there and I can manipulate what's going to be deployed in the environment, I just modify an ISO file, I just modify a base image, whatever. They can start rebuilding the environment all I care, because they're going to rebuild with my settings. Beautiful. I can control patch management. I even heard about, one of you guys informed me about an attack on some vendors' update service that was not Microsoft, where you have an in-house update server. Could also be nice. Things to look out for is these administrative workstation jump servers, which are also considered management servers, because on those you will have credentials of really powerful, highly privileged accounts. I'm going to get back to that in a bit. And also for all the management servers, if your operating system integrity is compromised, you have a problem. And this one I like. This was the one with the PKI. An attacker could introduce a new PKI in the environment. So I get in there, I see they have an existing PKI maybe. I say, okay, I can utilize that and create a smart card logon certificate template, issue that, do whatever I want, delete the template again. I have the certificate. Or I could say, I want to create my own and publish that in Active Directory. Everybody is going to trust my certificate authority, my root certificate. So nice little way of doing this. And the defenders should ask themselves, would I detect if a new PKI hierarchy was introduced in my environment? Like, do I get a warning? Maybe not. I don't think so. I haven't seen that many places. Anyway, most places. Another way to do this is to become an enrollment agent. With the enrollment agent permission, you can issue certificates on behalf of any user in the environment, including domain admins. So operating system integrity, I'm not going to go into this because this is probably too basic. This is everything you know about Windows exploitation and Windows backdoors. The host operating system has some weaknesses, whatever. Patch management, backup, if you restore from a bad media. This one is kind of new maybe. I like this one a lot, dropping a profile.ps1 in this directory on a domain controller will make sure that my code is launched every time a domain admin launches a PowerShell console on the system. So it's like a shared profile. Everybody on this domain controller should run this code every time they launch a PowerShell console. So very powerful, and it shouldn't turn up in red if you're an attacker. Maybe you should just not do any write or print output, maybe. Sean Pierce has done some research on application compatibility shims. Very interesting to make sure an executable actually also does something else before executing. Really powerful. You can have local users most places. And there's some new research going on about WMI. You can have providers that are really, really, really awful, malicious, evil. They even call them evil WMI provider. I'm linking to the research later in this document. There are also new forensics capabilities on this area. Until recently, we couldn't actually detect this because WMI is in a binary file that is not really easily interpreted. But some guys actually did the work, and we are now able to see through this. If the virtualization platform has weaknesses, your domain controller will have a weakness. Until maybe in a few years, when we start encrypting domain controllers in virtual environments and servers, so we might be in a better place. The storage platform is a problem. Obviously, physical access, all of these remote management options. On my laptop, I have a local user that is in a group called HyperV administrators. With that one, from any machine, if I authenticate to this one, assuming the firewall is allowing this, obviously. And don't start attacking me because it's offline, so no need to try. But anyway, this is gonna make sure that I can remote in and do console access to anything, any guest that this host operating system has inside HyperV. Very powerful. Old stuff. Even the sticky keys and Excel. So you boot up and there's a login screen. You hit the sticky keys like 5 times, shift or so, and boop, you have a command prompt running in the system. Really nice. Auto runs. I love this tool. Everything in here is relevant for operating system integrity, right? What I particularly like is that some are red highlighted here. So for instance, this one, gather network info, you see at the bottom. What if I manipulated the code inside of that? It's not validated by anything. It could be run as a system. So I have my own code running. It's VBS. I have to do some work again to get back to how to script with VBS. But anyway, you could do it. And you could just set up a trigger, and would the defenders actually spot this? I don't know. One interesting thing is that actually Autoruns also lists, like I set up a group policy, a local group policy with a startup script. It will actually list those, so you are able to detect those attacks if there should be any. Administrative practices. We should use a lot of work on this, because to be honest, many things about Microsoft platform security is about administering wrong or right. There are good ways of doing things, and there are really bad ways of doing things, and we have tended to do things really bad since the 1990s. And I'm not saying it's just the customer's fault, or maybe it's Microsoft who didn't really know where we were going and how things should be set up. But for instance, the domain administrators, having so many domain administrators, really, there's no point. You only need domain admin permissions in very, very few cases along the year in a normal setup. There are other ways of doing it. Storing credentials everywhere in the environment. I've even seen domain admin accounts logging on, running as services on clients, on endpoints. It's just stupid. I mean, user being local admin is actually implicitly also a domain admin, because it can read the memory and read out the stored credentials, even in clear text in this case. People should know the Windows logon types. There's a difference between doing an interactive logon and doing a network logon, in the fact that an interactive logon will leave credentials on the box, so it's going to be interesting to attack that one. If you just do a network logon, you will not leave your credentials there. So this is about credential hygiene, and I really like the concept, and it's like firewalling and isolating your environment, but on a group and user level. So a really high privileged account should not log on to something that is in a trust zone or security zone below his own. Much more in the white papers from Microsoft, which everybody should read if they work with this stuff. Did I miss something? Oh, knowledge among admins. Okay, so wish me luck. This is gonna be a demo of, I have 2 machines here. So first, I would really love to demo. Okay, I can't speak while entering a password. That's how my brain works, apparently. Annoying. I have 2 machines. One is the domain controller here. To not waste your time with installing an Active Directory certificate service, I just did that beforehand. This could be an attacker doing that. So I installed that on a domain controller because it's easy. And I issued a smart card logon certificate template. I set it to 100 years. I don't know if you can see this. If not, I'll just show you here. Okay, 100 years and maybe 50 years for renewal period. That should be fine. I'll be dead by then, maybe. And one thing to remember is that we configure this for smart card logon, this certificate template. And under cryptography, we will make sure that this certificate, whoa, come on, excuse me, has this Microsoft-based smart card crypto provider. On this machine, I have actually a smart card reader, but what I'm using is a virtual smart card instead, because it's just easier. An attacker could do the same. So I have also issued the certificate, published it to the domain. So over here I'm logged in as an administrator just to make things more easy here on a normal domain joined machine. And some of this is going to take some time, so just allow me to explain while it's going. Right now I'm contacting Active Directory certificate service to figure, or actually Active Directory to figure out what templates are out there for me to get, and hopefully we'll see my smart card log on. So I'll click that. And what should happen when I click enroll is it's going to prompt me for the PIN code because we want security. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. My normal password. There we go. So it's enrolling. And if everything works out nicely, what we should see is I get a certificate down with success. And over here, afterwards, I'm going to reset the administrator password. So and log out of here and show you that I can actually still come back as an attacker and log on into the environment, even though I don't have the password. So that will hopefully be the case. And just to cut, because I don't have so much time, I will just show you. Oh, there it is. Finish. So as I promised, I will log off this machine that I incidentally changed the resolution for. While doing that, I'll have to close this one. I'm right-clicking the administrator over here, resetting the password, and you just have to trust me, because I'm trustworthy. I have configured a new password here, so I'll just come back as an attacker. I'll choose something else here, and here, sign-in options. I now have, you can see there's a smart card icon, and there's like a chip, a GPM chip. That's where my virtual smart card is. Password has changed, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And this will take probably 10, 20 minutes, maybe. So while it's trying to log on, hopefully not blowing up my demo. And I'm a proud atheist, so I don't believe in demo gods. I believe in being prepared. Anyway, this is the thing over here I've configured is I've set the LSA DSRM admin logon behavior to a value of 2. The value of 2 is going to say I can be running the domains, Active Directory domain services, while actually also being able to log on without stopping the service. If I had set it to 1, I would have to stop the Active Directory services, and then I could log on. But with 2, it's much more easy for me as an attacker. Okay, over here, actually, I'm logged on. I didn't have any password. I came back, and I'm in. So what should we remember? Check if somebody issued certificates while you were not looking. Okay. So we will just finish this one up with, I told you that this is a domain admin who's logged in here. The administrator here is, my Active Directory is called AD, because I like that. So I'll try again. I'll just hit escape because now it's normal console access. And as I explained, this actually also works remote, but this is just 2012 R2. So there's this licensing error. No, I don't want to log on as AD administrator. I'm going to choose DC1, the name of the computer that the domain controller is running on, and present the password that we set while installing Active Directory. It prompts you onto DC promo for a directory services restore mode password. That is actually the local administrator account on the machine. You can change that later on, and as an attacker, you might not know what it is, so you would use ntdis util to either set a particular password that you want. Okay, I'm just going to do it. There we go. You can set it to something you want and know, and nobody's going to know because nobody looks for that password change. To be honest, nobody does. But you know it. And you could also synchronize with a particular user, run a script that will synchronize with a user in Active Directory, so you know you will maintain your backdoor even though the stupid administrators ask you to change password all the time. So you will just synchronize. Okay, what I wanted to show in this scenario is I put up a command prompt. I'm running as a local administrator, just the same as before. I showed you this dialog. It just says that to manage users, groups, and computers, log on as a user with domain administration rights. Okay, what I will do is something else. I will do just I have some tools on this one. Could be done in other ways. It's just easier this way. And of course, people will spot that somebody is using PSExec, right? Oh, licensing. Yeah, thank you, Mark Rosinovich. He's a great guy. So many great tools. There we go. Okay, so now I have a new command prompt here running also as an administrator. This time with system context. Let's do a who am I? I'm the local system, so let's go run dsa.msc again. And it's going to pop up because I'm now also a domain admin in this environment. So that was the demo. I survived. Nobody died. Okay, continuing. The question is, when can we state this house is clean, whatever, clean? I missed that. Okay, we looked at all the TTPs. We looked for all the IOCs. I now declare this house is clean. When is that? When are we ever able to do that? Well, I like the answer, maybe. What do people typically do after an attack? Well, companies, organizations tend to try to not rebuild. That's really expensive. Starting from scratch, new domain controllers, new platform, obviously, because we might own the hardware too. We might own the firmware level, whatever. But rebuilding is, I've never seen it, kind of. It's very seldom anyway. They will maybe reset all the user account passwords, so annoying every user in the domain for no reason. Maybe, or it should be taking the step. I'm not saying that, but they forget to do all of the other things. I'm just going to leave the list here. The slides are probably going to be available online. We'll fix something with the SecT guys, so it's going to be up there. There's a lot of content in here. But continuing on the thought, resetting computer accounts, that's really missed. People don't see the passwords for computers. That's actually the same as having an authenticated user in Active Directory. The trust keys between domains, nobody actually took care of those. Investigate group policy changes, I don't think so. Investigating PKI trusts and issued certificates, people don't do that. So I have here listed some things that will survive a domain-wide user password change. And it's not a complete list, just to make sure you won't blame me at some point later if you are owned. What survives a domain controller replacement? Well, same as on the slide before, and also these things. Not a complete list. And the question is, did we look everywhere? No list is complete. And I'm afraid to say this, and this is my honest opinion on this. If you want to be 100% sure, as somebody in the audience also concluded, you have to rebuild the environment from scratch. Once a domain admin, always a domain admin. That's kind of the motto I like to tell people out there in organizations. They tend to give away these rights like, okay, you just hired, okay, you have to sit in IT, or you're an IT help desk guy, you have to do some very important things, so now you're a domain admin. And from that point, he's going to potentially own you for many, many years until you reset the KBGT account or do some other stuff. And just remember, an attacker could do all kinds of anti-forensics while being in the environment. So this, did we look everywhere? Yeah, maybe you looked, but the attacker deleted some stuff that should be there. And what is the state really out there on event monitoring? People say, well, we have a SIEM. We really, all it does many places is just to collect logs. People don't really get anything of value out of it. Maybe you do. I would love to hear about it. But what we see as penetration testers is it almost never happens that we are spotted because of the SIEM thing. But anyway, use your money. No, use your money in somewhere else. Use it to educate the administrators instead. Use it to get awareness around how Active Directory really works. That's my opinion. Oh, mitigation. I could reinvent this, and a lot of stuff is actually also in the white papers I'm going to mention. But this Sean Metcalf, I want to give a huge shout out to him. I'm a big fan of his. He doesn't know. But anyway, he has some great talks on DEF CON and Black Hat this year. And he has some mitigation steps that are very good. I may not agree with the order, but instead of trying to reinvent something new, I just added my own, and this is based on his work. And we don't have time to go through with it all. This is defense stuff. You should definitely look at it. But here, minimize the groups that have admin. That is just like basic stuff. Go through these. I have 5 slides of where this is going to surprise somebody. The top one, domain admins, there should be none. And what I want to point out, that this doesn't mean that an IT auditor should set up a script that looks in this group, and if it's above 0, there's going to be a red report. Because even though it's 0, people might be in other groups. There might be delegation. I've gone through all of this, that it's a weakness in most Active Directory environments. So just looking in a group, I don't want to get there that people are thinking about domain admins should be 0 all the time. No, all of these things should be in order. There's like a lot of tendency to just debate this issue, that's what I'm saying. It's not all about the default groups. Trust settings. Okay, was that it? Actually, I have some tools I would like to mention. I have mentioned Mimikatz. You should hack yourself. You should definitely hack yourself. Every organization should be able to give permission to people internally to try to hack themselves, try to look at this stuff. We can do it also. We get hired to stuff like that. But everybody should actually be able to penetrate their own environment, try to. I have A reference, a very new one, I think it's from BrewCon or 44Con, I don't remember. There's a reference in my slides to a great, there's a great slide on some approaches like a 10-step thing, what to do to what to try out. Like trying to get the service principal names on whatever you have registered in your Active Directory. Because every service in Active Directory, like if you install a SQL server, you don't have to do much work to figure out that it's there. You can just query Active Directory, and you can actually get the hash of the service account. And that is why one of these things is make sure your service account passwords, Kerberos service account passwords at least, are above 25 characters or whatever you find is reasonable with the GPU stuff we have now. If we have quantum, maybe it should be, I don't know, 1 billion trillion, I don't know. But what was this one? Oh yeah, just detecting this tool at the bottom, detecting file integrity, for instance, on ISO files, for instance, on the script files, the logon scripts that you're running. If they suddenly change, there should be a good reason for that. Windows Activity Logger is by NCC Group. We have a tool that can monitor processes changing and all kinds of nice things. It's kind of close to Sysmon that you may know. This one, BTA, not many people I think have heard of it. It was on the Arsenal, in the Arsenal room at Black Hat. And this guy from Airbus, the Airbus group here, they have created a tool that will take the ntds.dit, extract it and analyze it, and make it possible to do a comparison between two dates, points in time. So you'd say, okay, we were attacked at this point. This is what the Active Directory looked like before that, and how does it look now? So you can do a very detailed analysis of the delegation changes, for instance, not just groups. Advanced Threat Analytics from Microsoft is coming out. It will cost you money. It will, if you don't have the CALs already, and many people, many organizations actually do, not minor companies perhaps, but this is going to spot many of the attacks out there, and it's such a beautiful, it's almost like, yeah, it couldn't be any better. It's tapping into the network interface of domain controllers. It's not even part of the domain. It's just listening for the traffic and watching the Kerberos and the DNS traffic going on. Really beautiful and able to spot the most common things out there. I have a small tool. I must admit I'm working on the next version that should be even better. I don't have so much time, but this is just going to give a quick status of how does this Active Directory look. So when I get out to a client, a customer, I prefer to run this before actually cracking all the passwords in the domain and compromising the domain because I have permission. This is going to give me a quick view of how the state is. For instance, if I can see that the computer containers is full of 500 computer objects, it's probably so that they don't use Active Directory in the correct manner. If they have guest accounts enabled, if they have Kerberos delegation, I know this from this group, etc. I can see when the Kerb TGT was last reset. So some shout outs. These guys, I really recommend people following these guys if you are interested in the subject. They are really, really, really great at what they're doing and much better than I am. So everything I know, it's probably these guys' fault. I have references in this. As I said, main reference is probably Sean Metcalf. I've put in some very interesting slides of his. Also Grant Buger, who did a talk at the DEF CON. Really interesting also about persistence in Active Directory. He goes a bit more into the actual events, the event IDs that you can trace and see. You can, if you are able to handle that amount of traffic actually in your backend environment. Some amazing white papers I want to mention in particular are the Mitigating Past the Hash and Other Credential Theft version 2. If you don't read version 1, just read version 2. This is where Microsoft states assume breach, which is a mindset that everybody should have these days. You should be able to have an environment where you know for sure that one machine is bad, at least. One user is an insider who's trying to hurt you. That should be your mindset these days. It shouldn't be that, oh, the bad guys are out there. The mindset should be defense in depth, and you are able to protect even though they hit the first machines in the environment, like the clicking of the users and stuff. And one white paper that is seldomly read, because it's huge, by Laura Robinson, mainly as an editor. Best Practices for Securing Active Directory is a really, really good white paper, and too few people actually read it. Also Laura here with an admin-free Active Directory. Some great articles out there. So, continuing with the references. That was it. Questions?
Thank you very much, Jakob. So, I don't know. I don't know what kind of reaction to have. It's sometimes you hear the expression, "If you don't do everything, you've done nothing." Yeah. But I critique people for using that analogy. But it kind of feels like, is there a point in trying to salvage things?
Is there
a point in trying to salvage an AD?
Yes, I think there is. It's just a matter of how willing you are to take some risk, because that's basically it. Many companies are probably gonna close the doors and stop business, and so it's a business decision really. It's not a technical decision.
Yeah, but then it's a question of, is it still functioning or not?
It will probably be functioning. I know Active Directories out there that are running where people know that they are compromised to some extent, and trying to build something more secure by the side. Actually, in the white paper, you will see a recommendation of having an admin forest, a forest set up beside the compromised maybe environment, where you will have a much more structure and much more secure environment, and being able to administer that environment in a secure way. And I'm not going to go into that, but that was with IPsec settings, and that was with a special way of handling the groups. And then you will, from this point, be able to handle the other Active Directory. The thing is, stuff like the zero-day doomsday thingy, it could compromise still that setup. If you have a zero-day, and we all live with the fact that there are zero days out there. Right now, there are probably many more zero days than we want to admit or think about. Yeah. But yeah, we are vulnerable all the time, and I think it's a matter of taking the steps where you say, these are low-hanging fruits, so we can actually get very far from, and that's why the mitigation things are like in steps. Start here, then you will improve the security. But I agree, we tend to say, or incident responders tend to say, what we do when we come in, we look for what the attackers did. So they try to do some forensics, but I'm not sure that all forensics guys who are really good at looking at, for instance, network forensics or disk forensics are necessarily good at knowing what's happening inside Active Directory. There should be Active Directory forensics too, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So when something bad has happened, it's not enough to look at the disks of a few computers or servers in the environment and look at the network traffic. You should probably also look at the Active Directory itself. But it's a matter of taking risk, and at some point you've done enough, and there are people out there who have been re-compromised a few weeks after because they didn't take enough steps. So,
yeah, you had referenced this using AD in the correct way. I think you said in a
yes
references. Like, is there a correct way then?
Yes, there are correct ways of doing this. Still, the zero-day is going to be a problem if it's out there, but there are much better ways of doing it than we have done so far, and it's a matter of knowledge and getting it out there how this should be done, and also getting the technical people to stand up to management and say, hey, this needs to change, because I very often see that the technical people, they actually agree. Once they understand what needs to happen, that the workstation they work on needs to be particularly protected and isolated from everything else, and some systems need to be isolated also on a credential level, etc., etc. They agree on that, but bringing it to higher management and saying exactly why and getting funding and getting approvals and stuff, they don't want to go there. So that's why sometimes I have to kick in the door and try to raise awareness. And it could be nice to have every time the technical guy standing behind and saying this has to be done, because yeah,
it's important. So
it is important.
I'm guessing we have questions in the audience.
Over here?
Yep.
Over here somewhere?
Yeah,
Oh, there we are.
I think it's mainly was answered right now, but how often do you run into a system that it's correctly set up? Is
How
it,
often do you run into a system that is
1%
correctly?
of the systems, or is it the majority?
I see a lot of environments, and there will always be room for improvement. So when I come in, I should have something else to say than they are already doing. And there will be stuff to do, and maybe it's not right for them. Maybe it doesn't. They don't have to take that extra step because of the threat. What do you say? The threats that they are facing. It might be an industry where it's not that relevant to be like military grade secure and having an admin forest for itself, etc. So it will depend. There will always be a next level. Almost always. I haven't seen the perfect environment yet.
Yep.
Yep.
Get a microphone here quickly.
I can repeat if. Yep.
One quick thing to add is basically if you were to go inside, it's with Microsoft and have ADUVIS, it's intense monitoring of accounts and logins and that sort of thing. And then it's basically audit, monitor,
Yeah.
and repeat. And I mean, like, seriously, they know if somebody adds to a group or vis or that, it's caught like snap.
Yeah.
But it's a question of whether you want to make sure that you have the response to the fact that anything changes, you know exactly what it was and exactly why it happened.
Yeah, as I said, Active Directory defense is hard. It's not easy.
No more arms up? I got one over there. Sorry making you run.
When you added the smart card authentication method, it added a new sort of menu option at the login prompt. Would that be hidden if the machine didn't actually have a smart card reader? Or, I mean, it seems pretty obvious. You know.
It will show that icon because I'm using this enhanced session in HyperV, which will take whatever device I have on my local attacker machine and show them only to me. So
Right.
it wouldn't be, if that's what you are, it wouldn't be.
So in the real world, sort of, if you started putting that smart card authentication in, and an admin went to a normal server, it wouldn't suddenly have that. Perfect.
No, it only shows because I'm showing it some hardware that has a smart card device attached.
Sure.
And or actually, Microsoft calls this a security device, and they call a smart card a smart card device. But also in a remote desktop session, it will work still. You can still bring your smart cards in a remote desktop session, so it doesn't have to look like this. It's virtual. That's the virtual world. It's virtual hardware. It's virtual everything.
All right, so if there's no more questions, I'm going to have you, first of all, big round of applause, Jakob.
Thank you.